Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold metal bars of his prison cell. The ship around him hummed with alien machinery that he still did not understand after 3 months of captivity. The walls were made of some dark material that seemed to absorb light, making everything feel gloomy and hopeless. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the Vorthek guards coming down the corridor. Their boots made a distinct clicking sound on the metal floor. Jake had learned to recognize that sound. It meant someone was going to suffer today. The Vorthek were tall creatures with gray skin that looked like old leather. They had 4 arms and yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. They wore black uniforms with silver markings that showed their rank. Jake had been a soldier before his capture, so he understood military symbols. These guards were not the lowest rank, but they were not officers either. Jake watched as the guards stopped at different cells. They were making their daily selection. Every day, they picked prisoners for their cruel games. Some prisoners never came back. Others returned broken and scared. The other prisoners knew what was happening. Jake could see them backing away from their cell doors. There were many different types of aliens in this prison ship. Some looked almost human, but with different colored skin or extra arms. Others were so strange that Jake could barely understand how they moved or breathed. One group of aliens looked like large bears, but walked on 2 legs. They were called the Gentle Giants, and they came from a planet called Serenity Prime. Despite their size, they were peaceful creatures who had never hurt anyone. The Vorthek had destroyed their world just because they could. Another group were the Zilani. They were small and delicate with beautiful wings like butterflies. Their skin seemed to shine with its own light. Jake had heard that they could feel the emotions of others. Before the war, they had been known throughout the galaxy as healers and peacekeepers. A Vorthek guard stopped in front of a cell 3 doors down from Jake. Inside was a young Zilani female. Jake had seen her before, but had never spoken to her. The language barrier made it hard to talk to most of the other prisoners. But he had noticed that she always tried to help other prisoners when she could. When someone was hurt or crying, she would reach through the bars and try to comfort them. The guards opened her cell door with a loud clang. The sound echoed through the corridor like a bell ringing for the dead. The young Zilani shrank back. Against the far wall of her cell, her wings trembling with fear. "Come out, little bug," one of the guards said in the common galactic language that most species understood. His voice was rough and cruel. "It is your turn to entertain us." The Zilani shook her head and spoke in her own musical language. Jake could not understand the words, but he could hear the fear and pleading in her voice. She was asking them not to take her. She was begging for mercy, but the Vorthek did not believe in mercy. They believed that only the strong deserved to live. In their society, helping the weak was seen as a sign of weakness itself. They thought that by being cruel, they were making the universe stronger. The guards grabbed the Zilani by her arms and dragged her from the cell. Her feet barely touched the ground as they carried her down the corridor. Jake could see tears running down her face. Her wings were pressed tight against her back, and she was making small crying sounds. Other prisoners watched from their cells, but did nothing. Jake understood why. They had all learned that trying to help others only made things worse. The Vorthek would punish anyone who tried to interfere. After months of this treatment, most prisoners had given up hope. They had learned to look away when others suffered. The guards dragged the Zilani to a large open area in the center of the ship. This area was called the Arena by the prisoners. It had a big circular opening in the floor that went down through many levels of the ship. The Vorthek called this opening the Pit. Jake had heard stories about the Pit from other prisoners. It was where the Vorthek played their cruelest games. They would throw prisoners into the pit and watch them fall. The pit had energy fields. That would slow the fall just enough to make it last longer, but not enough to save anyone who went in. More guards appeared, and they were laughing. They enjoyed this part of their duty. To them, the suffering of others was entertainment. They spoke to each other in their own language, but Jake could tell they were making jokes about what was going to happen. A young Zelani was forced to stand at the edge of the pit. She looked down into the darkness below, and then back at the guards. Her whole body was shaking with terror. She spoke again in her musical language, and this time Jake thought he could hear her saying something like a prayer. One of the guards reached out and grabbed her left wing. With a quick, brutal motion, he bent it at an unnatural angle. There was a soft snapping sound, and the Zelani cried out in pain. Her damaged wing hung limp at her side, and Jake could see that flying was now impossible for her. "Oops," the guard said with a laugh. "Looks like your wings are broken, little bug. I guess you will have to fall like a rock." The other guards thought this was very funny. They made more jokes about how Zelani were supposed to be able to fly, but this one would fall like any other creature. They seemed to find great pleasure in the fact that they had taken away her one chance of survival. Jake felt something burning in his chest. It was anger, but it was more than that. It was rage at the unfairness of what he was seeing. This young alien had done nothing wrong. She had only tried to help others and comfort them. She did not deserve this fate. The guards pushed the Zelani closer to the edge of a pit. She was trying to balance on one foot while holding her injured wing. Jake could see that she was in great pain, but she was trying not to show it. Even facing death, she was trying to be brave. "Any last words, little bug?" one of the guards asked. "Perhaps you want to call for your mother? Or maybe you want to ask your gods to save you." The Zelani looked up at the guard and said something in her own language. Her voice was soft but clear. Jake did not understand the words, but somehow he knew she was not begging. She was not cursing them either. If he had to guess, he would say she was forgiving them. This seemed to make the guards even angrier. They wanted her to beg. They wanted her to show fear and desperation. Instead, she was showing them dignity and grace even in her final moments. "Stupid creature," one guard said. "You think your weakness makes you noble? You think you're pathetic. Kindness has any value? Watch how the universe rewards such foolishness." The guard raised his hand to push her into the pit. The Zelani closed her eyes and seemed to be preparing herself for death. Around the arena, other prisoners watched in silence. Some had tears in their eyes, but none of them moved to help. Jake looked at the scene before him and made a decision that would change everything. He had been a rescue specialist in the Colonial Marines before his capture. He had sworn an oath to protect those who could not protect themselves. That oath had not died just because he was now a prisoner. The guard's hand moved toward the Zelani's back. In a few seconds, she would fall into the pit and die while her captors laughed. Jake could not let that happen. He would not let that happen. As the Zelani teetered on the edge of death, Jake Morrison stepped forward and spoke the words that would start a revolution. "Hey, ugly, pick on someone your own size." The Vorthic guards turned to look at Jake with surprise. They had not expected any prisoner to speak up during the selection. In their experience, prisoners learned quickly to stay quiet and look away. When others were chosen for punishment, Jake stepped out from the crowd of watching prisoners. His hands were not shaking, even though he knew what he was about to do would probably get him killed. He had made peace with death many times before during his military service. Fear was just another enemy to overcome. "I said pick on someone your own size," Jake repeated, louder this time. His voice carried across the arena, and other prisoners began to look at him with shock and confusion. The guard who had been about to push the Zelani laughed. "Look at this, brothers. The human thinks he can give us orders. Perhaps he wants to join the little bug in the pit." "That works for me," Jake said. He started walking toward the edge of the pit where the guards stood with their prisoner. "Let her go." and I will take her place." The Zalani turned to look at Jake with wide, confused eyes. She did not understand why this stranger was trying to help her. In her months of captivity, she had learned that everyone only cared about their own survival. Yet here was someone willing to die for her. The guard holding the Zalani's damaged wing squeezed it harder, making her cry out in pain. The human thinks he is a hero, but heroes are just fools who die for nothing. "We will throw you both into the pit, and then everyone can watch you fall together." Jake continued walking forward until he was only a few steps away from the guards. Up close, they were even more frightening. Each Vorthik was at least 2 feet taller than him, and their forearms gave them a huge advantage in any fight. But Jake had not survived 3 wars by being intimidated by bigger enemies. "Here is a better idea," Jake said. "You let her go, and I will show you something interesting. I will show you how a human falls." The guards looked at each other with confusion. They were not sure what Jake meant, but they were curious. Vorthik society valued strength and courage, even in their enemies. They respected warriors, even when they were about to kill them. "What makes you think a human falls differently than any other creature?" the lead guard asked. Jake smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a soldier who had just figured out how to turn a bad situation to his advantage. "Because humans do not fall alone. We reach out and grab whatever we can on the way down." Before the guards could react, Jake lunged forward. But instead of attacking the guards, he dove straight toward the pit. The guards were so surprised that they stepped backward, accidentally loosening their grip on the Zalani. Jake grabbed the edge of the pit with both hands and swung his body over the side. For a moment, he hung there by his fingertips, looking up at the shocked faces of the guards and prisoners above. "You want to see me fall?" Jake called out. "Then watch this." He let go of the edge and dropped into the pit, but as he fell, he twisted his body and reached out with both arms. The energy fields in the pit were designed to slow a falling prisoner, just enough to make the experience more terrifying. Jake used his knowledge of physics and his military training to position himself correctly. The Zalani watched in amazement as Jake fell past her level. As he went by, he reached out and grabbed her around the waist with one arm. The impact nearly knocked the breath out of both of them, but Jake held on tight. "I got you," he said, even though he knew she could not understand his words. "I will not let you fall alone." The guards above began shouting angrily. They realized that Jake had tricked them. Instead of simply falling to his death, he had turned his fall into a rescue attempt. This was not how the selection was supposed to work. Jake used his free arm to grab onto one of the energy field generators that lined the walls of the pit. The generator was hot and sent painful shocks through his arm, but he ignored the pain. He had felt worse during his military service. With the Zalani held securely against his side, Jake began to look for a way out of the pit. The walls were smooth metal with very few handholds, but there were maintenance panels every few levels. If he could reach one of those panels, he might be able to find a way into the ship's service tunnels. The Zalani was very light, which helped. Her people were built for flying, so their bones were hollow like a bird's. Even with her damaged wing, she was not much of a burden to carry. She wrapped her good arm around Jake's neck and held on tight. Jake could feel her trembling with fear and pain, but she was not crying anymore. She seemed to understand that this human was trying to save her, even though she did not know why. Her large eyes looked into his face with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. Above them, the guards were getting more and more angry. They began adjusting the energy fields to try to kill both prisoners. The fields that had been designed to slow a fall were now being turned into weapons. Jake felt the energy around them getting stronger and more dangerous. The air itself seemed to crackle with electricity. He knew they only had a few seconds before. The guards would turn the energy field's lethal dot using all his strength. Jake swung them both toward the wall of the pit. His shoulder hit the metal surface hard, but he managed to grab onto a maintenance panel with his free hand. The panel was locked, but Jake had learned a few things about alien technology. During his months of captivity, he pulled out a small piece of metal that he had been hiding in his boot. It was part of a food tray that he had sharpened into a tool. Over many weeks, the guards had never thought to search for such a simple weapon not working quickly. Jake used the makeshift tool to pry open the maintenance panel. Behind it was a narrow tunnel that led into the ship's internal systems. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person, but it would have to do. "Hold on tight," Jake told the Zilani, even though she could not understand him. She seemed to get the message anyway, because she gripped him even tighter with her good arm. Jake pulled them both into the maintenance tunnel, just as the energy fields in the pit turned deadly. Where they had been hanging just seconds before, the air now glowed with lethal radiation that would have killed them instantly. The tunnel was dark and cramped, but it was better than being dead. Jake began crawling forward, carrying the injured Zilani with him. Behind them, he could hear the guards shouting orders and alarms beginning to sound throughout the ship. The Zilani spoke softly in her musical language. Jake could not understand the words, but her tone was gentle and grateful. She seemed to be thanking him for saving her life. "Do not thank me yet," Jake whispered back. "We are not safe. We need to find somewhere to hide while I figure out our next move." As they crawled through the dark tunnel, Jake began to plan their escape. He knew the ship's layout better than the guards thought. During his months of captivity, he had been observing and learning. He knew which areas were heavily guarded and which ones were mostly empty. More importantly, he knew that his actions had been seen by dozens of other prisoners. Word would spread quickly through the ship's population. For the first time in months, someone had fought back. Someone had refused to accept the Vorthic's cruelty. Jake did not know it yet, but his simple act of reaching out to help another being was about to change everything. The other prisoners had watched a human risk his own life to save an alien he barely knew. They had seen that it was possible to choose courage over fear, compassion over selfishness. As alarms continued to sound throughout the ship, Jake Morrison crawled through the darkness, carrying an injured Zilani in his arms. Behind them, the first sparks of rebellion were beginning to kindle in the hearts of prisoners who had given up hope. Jake crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel for what felt like hours. The Zilani in his arms had grown quiet, but he could feel her breathing against his chest. Her body was warm and much lighter than a human of her size would be. Her damaged wing kept getting caught on pipes and cables in the tunnel, making her wince with pain each time. The tunnel system was more complex than Jake had expected. It branched off in many directions, leading to different parts of the ship. Jake had to make quick decisions about which way to go. He chose paths that led away from the main prison areas and toward the lower levels of the ship where there would be fewer guards. Behind them, Jake could hear the sounds of search teams moving through the ship. The Vorthik were not used to prisoners escaping, and they were taking it very seriously. Heavy boots stomped through corridors, and Jake could hear angry voices shouting orders in the harsh Vorthik language. Finally, Jake found what he was looking for. A maintenance tunnel opened into a small storage room deep in the ship's lower levels. The room was filled with old equipment and supplies that had been forgotten. Dust covered everything, which meant the guards rarely came here. Jake carefully helped the Zilani out of the tunnel and into the storage room. She tried to stand on her own, but her legs were shaking from fear and exhaustion. Jake caught her before she could fall and helped her sit down on a pile of old cloth. In the dim light of the storage room, Jake got his first good look at the alien he had risked his life to save. She was even smaller than he had thought, probably no taller than his shoulder if she stood up straight. Her skin had a pale blue color that seemed to glow softly in the darkness. Her hair was long and silver, and it moved as if it was floating in water. Her wings were the most beautiful thing Jake had ever seen. The undamaged right wing was transparent with patterns of color that shifted like oil on water. The left wing hung at a terrible angle, clearly broken in several places. Jake could see that it caused her great pain, but she was trying not to show it. The Zilani looked up at Jake with large eyes that seemed too big for her face. Her eyes were a deep purple color, and they held an intelligence that Jake found surprising. She spoke softly in her musical language, and even though Jake could not understand the words, he could hear the gratitude in her voice. "I wish I could understand you," Jake said quietly, "but I think you are saying thank you." "You do not need to thank me. No one deserves to be treated the way they were treating you." The Zilani tilted her head as she listened to Jake speak. She seemed to be trying to understand his words through his tone of voice. After a moment, she reached out with her good hand and gently touched Jake's arm. Her touch was very light, like a butterfly landing on his skin. Jake felt something strange when she touched him. It was as if a warm feeling spread through his body, making him feel calm and peaceful. The fear and anger that had been driving him since the rescue began to fade, replaced by a sense of hope that he had not felt in months. The Zilani pulled her hand back and looked surprised. Jake realized that she must have some kind of special ability related to emotions or thoughts. He had heard stories about different alien species having powers that humans did not understand. "That was interesting," Jake said with a small smile. "Can you feel what I am feeling? Is that how your people work?" The Zilani nodded slowly, as if she understood some of his words. She pointed to herself, and then to Jake, then made a gesture over her heart. Jake thought she was trying to explain that she could sense emotions. Jake nodded back to show that he understood. Then he pointed to her damaged wing and made a concerned face. "Your wing is badly hurt. I need to help you with that, but I do not know much about your people's anatomy. I will be very careful." The Zilani seemed to understand that Jake wanted to help with her injury. She turned slightly to give him better access to her damaged wing. Jake could see that several of the delicate bones in the wing were broken, and some of the transparent membrane was torn. Jake had learned basic medical skills during his military training, but he had never worked on an alien before. He would have to be very careful not to make the injury worse. Using strips of cloth from the storage room, he began to create a splint that would hold the wing in the correct position. As Jake worked, the Zilani watched his face carefully. She could feel through her empathic abilities that this human genuinely wanted to help her. There was no cruelty in him, no desire to cause pain. This was completely different from the Vorthic guards, who seemed to enjoy hurting others. The work was slow and delicate. Jake had to support each broken bone while wrapping it carefully with cloth. The Zilani made small sounds of pain, but she did not pull away or try to stop him. She seemed to trust that he was trying to help, even though they could barely communicate. While Jake worked on her wing, he began to talk to her in a quiet voice. He told her about his home on Earth, about the blue skies and green forests. He described the birds that flew through those skies, and how he thought her people must be like those birds in some ways. As Zilani listened to the sound of Jake's voice, even though she could not understand his words, there was something comforting about the way he spoke. His voice was gentle and kind, so different from the harsh voices of their captors. Jake finished wrapping the wing and sat back to look at his work. It was not perfect, but it would keep the bones in place while they healed. "There," he said. "That should help with the pain, at least." The Zilani carefully moved her wing and found that it did hurt less than before. She looked at Jake with grateful eyes and spoke again in her musical language. This time, Jake thought he could hear something like his name in the sounds she made. "My name is Jake," he said, pointing to himself. "Jake Morrison." Vizilani repeated the sounds as best she could. "Jake," she said, her musical voice making his name sound almost like a song. Then she pointed to herself and said something in her own language. It sounded like Kira to Jake's ears. "Kira?" Jake said, trying to pronounce it correctly. She nodded and smiled for the first time since he had met her. Her smile transformed her whole face, making her look younger and less afraid. "Nice to meet you, Kira," Jake said. "I'm sorry it had to be under these circumstances." Kira seemed to understand that they were introducing themselves to each other. She reached out again and briefly touched Jake's hand. This time, the warm feeling that passed between them was stronger. Jake felt a sense of friendship and trust that needed no words to explain. Their moment of peace was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the storage room. The search teams were getting closer. Jake quickly gathered some supplies from the room and prepared to move again. "We cannot stay here," he whispered to Kira. "They will find us soon. Can you walk?" Kira nodded and carefully stood up. Her legs were still shaky, but she seemed determined to keep going. Jake helped steady her and then led her toward another maintenance tunnel on the far side of the room. As they prepared to leave their temporary shelter, Jake realized that something had changed. He was no longer just trying to survive his captivity. He was no longer just thinking about his own escape. Now he had someone else to protect, someone who was counting on him. More importantly, he could feel that his actions were having an effect beyond just saving one life. Through Kira's empathic abilities, he could sense that something was changing throughout the ship. Other prisoners were feeling hope for the first time in months. The simple act of one person helping another was spreading like ripples in a pond. Jake did not know it yet, but his rescue of Kira was about to become the spark that would ignite a rebellion across the entire prison ship. Jake and Kira moved carefully through the maintenance tunnels as search teams stomped through the corridors above them. The sounds of the hunt were getting louder and more desperate. Jake could hear the Vorthic guards shouting angry orders at each other. They were not used to prisoners escaping, and their failure was making them furious. As they crawled through a wider section of tunnel, they heard voices ahead of them. Jake froze and motioned for Kira to be very quiet. The voices were speaking in the common galactic language, not the harsh Vorthic tongue. These were other prisoners. Jake carefully moved forward until he could see into a larger maintenance chamber. 3 aliens were huddled together in the dim light. One was a tall, thin creature with gray skin and 4 arms. Another looked almost human except for his bright green hair and pointed ears. The third was an elderly female with wrinkled blue skin and kind eyes. The elderly alien noticed Jake first. She said something in a language he did not recognize, and the other 2 turned to look at him. Jake tensed, ready to fight or run if necessary. He could not tell if these prisoners would help them or turn them in to the guards. But the elderly alien smiled and gestured for Jake and Kira to come forward. She spoke again, this time in the common galactic language. "Do not be afraid, young ones. We are friends here. I am Dr. Naya from the planet Kitharos. These are Ben and Torin." Jake helped Kira into the larger chamber. She was moving better now, and her wing was supported, but she was still in pain. Dr. Naya immediately noticed Kira's injuries and came forward with concern. "Oh, you poor child," Dr. Naya said gently. "Let me look at that wing. I am a doctor, and I have studied many different species." Kira looked at Jake uncertainly. Through her empathic abilities, she could sense that Dr. Naya meant no harm, but she had learned to be careful about trusting anyone. Jake nodded to show that he thought it was safe. Dr. Naya examined Jake's makeshift splint with professional interest. "This is good work," she said to Jake. "You have medical training?" "Some," Jake replied. "Basic field medicine from the military." Is she going to be okay? The wing will heal, but it will take time, Dr. Naya said. Zalani bones are delicate, but they mend well if properly cared for. You may have saved her ability to fly. Ben, the human-looking alien with green hair, spoke. Up. We heard what you did up there. The whole ship is talking about it. A human jumped into the pit to save Zalani. Nobody could believe it. Why is that so hard to believe? Jake asked. Torin, the gray-skinned alien, answered. Because for months, we have all learned to look out only for ourselves. The Vorthik have trained us to think that helping others is useless. They want us to believe that only the strong deserve to live. Dr. Naya finished examining Kira's wing and sat back. What you did today has reminded many prisoners of something. They had forgotten. We are not animals fighting for scraps. We are thinking beings who can choose to help each other. Kira spoke softly in her musical language. Dr. Naya's eyes widened with surprise, and she responded in the same language. They had a brief conversation while Jake and the others watched. What did she say? Jake asked. Dr. Naya smiled. She says that she can feel something changing throughout the ship. The emotions of the other prisoners are different now. Instead of despair and fear, she senses hope and determination. Your action has affected more people than you realize. Ben leaned forward eagerly. Some of the prisoners are starting to organize. The Krillian warriors who were captured last month are talking about fighting back. The Helix twins have been sabotaging security systems. Even the gentle giants are starting to move around their cells instead of just sitting quietly. This is dangerous talk, Torin warned. If the Vorthik hear about organized resistance, they will kill everyone. They have done it before on other ships. Jake thought about this for a moment. They are already planning to kill us, he said. I heard the guards talking about a cleansing operation. They want to make an example of this ship to prevent other prisoners from getting ideas about escape. Dr. Naya nodded sadly. I have heard the same rumors. Commander Vextar is angry about today's events. He believes that showing mercy to prisoners makes the Vorthik look weak. Then we have nothing to lose by fighting back, Jake said. If they are going to kill us anyway, we might as well make it difficult for them. Kira spoke again in her language, and Dr. Naya translated. She says that her people have a saying, a single candle can light 1,000 others without dimming itself. She believes that your courage today has lit many candles throughout this ship. Pretty words, Torin said bitterly. But candles do not stop plasma rifles. The Vorthik have weapons and armor. We have nothing. We have something they do not understand, Jake said. We have the willingness to help each other. They think that makes us weak, but I think it makes us stronger. Ben nodded enthusiastically. There are prisoners from 50 different worlds on this ship. Each species has different abilities and knowledge. If we work together, we might be able to do things that the Vorthik never expect. Dr. Naya looked thoughtful. The Vorthik have always conquered by dividing their enemies. They make different species fight each other instead of fighting them. But if we unite, we become something they have never faced before. Jake finished. An enemy that gets stronger when they try to break us apart. Kira reached out and touched Jake's hand again. This time, the warm feeling that passed between them was different. Jake could sense not just Kira's emotions, but the emotions of prisoners throughout the ship. He felt their fear, but also their growing hope. He felt their anger at their captors, but also their love for each other. She is sharing the emotional state of the ship with you, Dr. Naya explained. This is a rare gift among the Zalani. She can connect minds across great distances. Jake felt overwhelmed by the flood of emotions from hundreds of different beings. But underneath all the individual feelings, he sensed something growing. It was unity. For the first time since their capture, the prisoners were thinking of themselves as one group instead of many separate, frightened individuals. "We need to coordinate this," Jake said. "If prisoners throughout the ship are ready to act, we need to make sure they act together. Otherwise, the Vorthik will crush each group separately." Dr. Naya pulled out a small device from her robes. "I have been secretly modifying this medical scanner. It can send signals to other parts of the ship without the guards detecting it. We can use it to communicate with the other resistance groups." Ben grinned. "The humans have a saying about hope being the last thing to die. I think on this ship, hope is the first thing to come back to life." Torin still looked worried. "Even if we can coordinate the prisoners, what then? The Vorthik still have superior weapons and training." Jake thought about his military experience and what he knew about successful rebellions. "The key is not to fight them where they are strongest. We need to make them fight us where we are strongest. And where is that?" Dr. Naya asked. Jake smiled. And for the first time since his capture, it was a smile that held real hope. "In showing others that they are worth saving. The Vorthik rule through fear and cruelty. We fight back with courage and kindness. Every time we help someone instead of abandoning them, we prove that their way is wrong." Kira squeezed Jake's hand and spoke in her musical language. Even without translation, Jake understood what she meant. She was ready to fight, not with weapons, but with the same compassion that had saved her life. The revolution was about to begin, and it would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The uprising began at dawn when the ship's lights came on for the daily cycle. But instead of the usual sounds of frightened prisoners hiding in their cells, the Vorthak guards heard something they had never heard before. The prisoners were singing Taunted. Started with Kira. Her musical voice carried through the maintenance shafts and air vents, reaching every corner of the ship. She sang an ancient Zelani song about hope surviving in the darkest places. Other Zelani prisoners heard her voice and joined in, their combined voices creating a beautiful harmony. And other species began to add their own songs, the deep, rumbling voices of the gentle giants mixed with the high, crystal tones of the Helix twins. Even species that had been enemies for centuries found their voices blending together in a chorus of defiance. Jake listened to the singing from his hiding place in the maintenance tunnels. Through Kira's empathic connection, he could feel the emotions of every prisoner on the ship. The fear was still there, but it was overwhelmed by something much stronger: unity, purpose, hope. Dr. Naya activated her modified medical scanner and sent the signal they had all been waiting for. Throughout the ship, resistance groups that had been secretly organizing for days received the same message: "Today we choose freedom." The Vorthik guards rushed to stop the singing, but they found something they were not prepared for. The prisoners were no longer cowering in their cells. They were standing together, and they were helping each other. When the guards tried to separate the Zelani singers, the gentle giants stepped forward to protect them. When the guards raised their weapons against the giants, the Helix twins used their psychic abilities to interfere with the weapons' targeting systems. When the guards tried to call for backup, they found that Ben and other technically skilled prisoners had sabotaged the communication systems. Commander Vexstar stormed into the prison levels with a squad of his best soldiers. He expected to crush this rebellion quickly and brutally, as the Vorthik had always done. Instead, he found something that confused and frightened him. The prisoners were not fighting like warriors or soldiers. They were fighting like a family defending their home. When one prisoner was injured, others immediately came to help. When the guards cornered a group of weak prisoners, stronger prisoners appeared from nowhere to protect them. "This is impossible," Vexstar snarled to his lieutenant. "Prisoners do not act this way. They think only of themselves. They abandon the weak to save their own lives." But his lieutenant was watching a human engineer named Carl help an injured Krillian warrior to safety, even though the two species had been at war for decades. Perhaps we were wrong about how these species behave, Commander. Vextar raised his plasma rifle and aimed it at Carl. But before he could fire, Jake Morrison appeared from a ventilation shaft above. Jake dropped down onto the Vorthic commander, knocking the weapon from his hands. "Remember me?" Jake said as they struggled on the floor. "I am the human who does not fall alone." Kira emerged from another hiding place, her damaged wings still supported by Jake's makeshift splint. She could not fly, but she could walk, and she could use her empathic abilities to coordinate the other prisoners. Through her mental connection, every resistance group on the ship knew exactly where they were needed most. The battle spread throughout the ship, but it was unlike any battle the Vorthic had ever fought. Every time they thought they had cornered their enemies, more prisoners appeared to help. Every time they tried to use their superior weapons, they found that the weapons had been sabotaged or that their targeting systems were being interfered with. Dr. Naya led a team of prisoners to the ship's medical bay, where they began treating wounded fighters from both sides. Even injured Vorthic guards received medical care, something that confused them greatly. They had been taught that enemies should be left to die, but these prisoners insisted on helping everyone. The Helix twins, Zara and Zane, used their psychic bond to take control of the ship's internal systems. They opened all the cell doors and activated emergency lighting that made it easier for the prisoners to move around. They also began broadcasting messages throughout the ship in dozens of different languages. "We are not your enemies," the message sighed. "We are not trying to conquer you. We just want to be free to help each other and live in peace." Some of the younger Vorthic guards began to hesitate when they heard these messages. They had been told that all other species were savage and evil, but the prisoners they were fighting were showing them mercy and kindness even in the middle of battle. Commander Vextar fought his way to the ship's communication center, determined to call for reinforcements from other Vorthic vessels. But when he arrived, he found Jake and Kira waiting for him. "It is over, Commander," Jake said calmly. "Your own crew is starting to question whether this fight is necessary." Vextar looked around and saw that Jake was right. Many of his guards had stopped fighting and were staring in confusion at prisoners who were helping wounded Vorthic soldiers. This was not how wars were supposed to work. "You have won nothing," Vextar growled. "Even if you take this ship, the Vorthic Empire will send 100 more ships to destroy you." Kira stepped forward and spoke in the common galactic language Dr. Naya had been teaching her during their hiding. "We do not want to destroy anyone. We want to show the galaxy a different way." She activated the ship's long-range communication system and began broadcasting a message on all frequencies. Her voice, speaking in halting but clear galactic common, reached ships and planets throughout this part of the galaxy. "My name is Kira of Vizalani. I am speaking from a Vorthic prison ship where something wonderful has happened. A human named Jake Morrison saw me falling and reached out his hand to save me. That one act of kindness has reminded everyone on this ship that we do not have to hate each other." Jake took over the broadcast. "The Vorthic tell you that only the strong deserve to survive. But I have learned something different. The strongest people are the ones who use their strength to help others, not to hurt them." The message was heard on human colonies, Zalani healing stations, Krillian battle cruisers, and planets throughout the sector. More importantly, it was heard on other Vorthic ships where prisoners had been giving up hope. Within hours, reports began coming in of uprisings on other prison ships. But these were not violent revolts. They were revolutions of compassion, where prisoners followed Jake and Kira's example of helping each other instead of fighting each other. Dr. Naya appeared on the bridge, carrying a wounded Vorthic soldier. This young guard was injured protecting prisoners from his own commander, she announced. He chose to help instead of harm. More Vorthic crew members began to defect, unwilling to fight people who insisted on showing them kindness even in battle. The revolution was spreading not through force, but through example. Commander Vexstar found himself almost alone as his own soldiers laid down their weapons. He looked at Jake and Kira with a mixture of anger and confusion. "How?" he demanded. "How did you turn my own crew against me?" Jake helped Kira sit down in the captain's chair. Her empathic abilities were exhausted from coordinating the resistance, but she was smiling. "We did not turn them against you," Jake said. "We just showed them that there was another choice." As rescue ships from a dozen different species converged on their location, Jake reflected on how much had changed since that moment when he decided to reach out his hand. The galaxy was beginning to learn that true strength came not from conquering others, but from lifting them up. Kira's wing was healing, and soon she would fly again. But more importantly, her example and Jake's courage had taught the galaxy to fly together, supporting each other instead of fighting each other. The human way of reaching out to help others had become the galactic way, one outstretched hand at a time.